Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Margaret Walton Roberts. I'm from Wilfrid Laurier University and one of the researchers with the Building Migrant Resilience in Cities project. I live and work on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people, and I'm very grateful for that opportunity. I'm very happy to welcome you to our latest webinar in a series of webinars that we've been holding on international students. And this webinar will focus on the question, are international students disposable workers? Canada has invited over 600,000 international students into Canada at all levels of study by the end of 2021. And we've particularly seen the importance of international students for colleges and universities that in many cases have become, dependent on the revenue stream that international fees offers, especially considering the decline that we've seen in public funding to this sector. Research has also shown that international students struggle in terms of finances and take on any number of jobs, no matter how poorly paid, in order to survive. So we also have seen an ongoing shortage of housing and also limited access to publicly provided services. And so we want to ask in this context, what are the impacts of allowing students to work more hours, and what will the rules help or hinder international students? And also, what does this impact have in terms of the economy? So we've gathered an impressive group of panelists to address this issue, and each panelist will address specific questions. But I will introduce all of the panelists briefly now. Our first panelist will be Arun Thangaraj, Associate Deputy Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. He was previously the Associate Deputy Minister of Transport Canada and has held a number of executive positions at Global Affairs Canada and CIDA, the Canadian International Development Agency. I'm then going to turn to our other panelists and ask specific questions, starting with Dr. Randall Martin, who's Executive Director of the BC Council for International Education. And this group advances BC's agenda on international education, and he has more than 30 years experience in post-secondary education development, including international education. Then Bipin Kumar is the International Students Representative at the Canadian Federation of Students. He also works as Government Relations Coordinator at the University of Regina Students' Union and as Programme Coordinator for the Canadian Science Policy Centre. Catherine Denler is a Research Associate with the Immigration Knowledge Area at the Conference Board of Canada, and she's worked as an immigration researcher, educator and service provider for over 15 years. Miriam Menkney is an Executive Director of the Catholic Centre for Immigrants, Ottawa, and previously she served as the Executive Director of the Multicultural Association of the Greater Moncton area and has held numerous positions advocating for human rights, women's rights and addressing homelessness. Mikhail Skudarud is an economics professor at the University of Waterloo, director of the Canadian Labour Economics Forum and a research fellow at the Institute of Labour Economics. His research interests include the labour market, integration of immigrants. And also Sutama Ghosh, who's a geography professor at Toronto Metropolitan University, and she's published widely in immigrant settlement and integration, including work on international student experiences. And Sutama will be making some concluding comments for us. Now, during the panel, please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A, and we will attempt to answer them live during the panel, and we have some time at the end to also address them. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Arun and ask him to please briefly lay out the recent regulatory changes related to international students' hours of work and some of the thinking behind them. Thank you, Arun.
Thank you, and thank you for your invitation. And it's great to be with such a distinguished group of panelists, and with BMRC, who we've had a great working relationship with for I think almost 5 years now. Before I begin, I do want to also acknowledge that I am speaking to you today from the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, and I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to live and work in this place. As was noted, I'll give you a very, very brief overview of the regulatory changes and some of the driving factors behind it. And I think, one of the contextual factors is the fact that Canada has become top 4 destination for international students, and we are looking at over 700,000 students coming to Canada by the end of, that's what our data is saying for last year. Whereas, 10 or 20 years ago, we were at 1% of the entire market. And with that, I think there's a reflection of the study program, writ large. One element of it being the element of work. And there's complementary programs for postgraduate, but we were really focusing on what does it mean for a student who is studying and the hours worked as many students do. And as a program feature, there was a cap on participation or work hours at 20 hours per week. And there's a number of factors that led us to kind of look at the change, but some of the overarching strategic ones is the potential for international students to contribute more to the economy through participation of labor market during their studies, and to address, given their, to provide them with an opportunity as well to familiarize themselves with the Canadian market and with employers and also socially. And so as part of the transition from a student to a graduate to hopefully a permanent residence, expanding the educational or the work opportunities while pursuing education was seen to be an integral component to that. So in November, we announced the change that expanded or uncapped the hours that students are able to work off campus while pursuing their degree or their studies. And some of this was driven by labor market demands, and there's been a lot of calls as for students as an untapped labor source. But also, we are aware that international students, as they are studying, do face financial challenges. You mentioned housing, but overall cost increases for students, and this was also seen as a means for students to better support themselves while doing this. We did this mindful of the concerns, and we heard back from educational institutions, from students and others, is that balance that you strike between the hours worked and the ability to successfully complete studies, which is at the core of the study program. And so part of that is we wanted to ensure that students remain full-time. They cannot drop down to part-time or abandon their studies altogether. And and again, we know that there's unintended consequences and it's not perfect, but that was a feature that we built in. But the other issue that we were very cognizant of is students were often working more than 20 hours, but doing no sub rows. And part of it, the intention of this is to bring those back where they were less vulnerable to unscrupulous employers, who are, maybe taking advantage of the economic vulnerability of these students. So, I think there's always, I think we weren't blind to some of the unintended consequences, but, the initial feedback is that it was positively received by students. But again, we are still in early days. And so part of, what we hope is, again, through the Q&A and through the comments of other panelists to get a little bit more robust feedback of the policy. But we are working with provinces and territories and educational institutions on the performance metrics that we ought to be using to address this public policy. One of the things I probably should have mentioned is that this is temporary in nature. This isn't a permanent change. This is only in place till next December. Now, let me stop there. And I don't want to take up too much time, but open to the rest of the
Great. Thank you so